I don't know how much time I have. My hands won't stop shaking and my lungs burn like I breathed in fire. But I need to get this out because I don't know if I'll make it out of the woods alive before whatever's moving in the treeline finds me. If you're reading this, you need to understand, everything about Helix Ion Labs wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was real, and we released something that should have stayed buried forever. My fingers keep slipping on the screen. There's dirt under my nails and blood in the cracks of my knuckles. Some of it's mine. Most of it isn't. I keep expecting to hear the rotors, you know? That low, comforting chop of the bird coming back to pick us up because it was all a drill and somebody somewhere wants to pat us on the back and tell us we passed. But all I hear are branches knocking together and something big pacing just outside the circle of trees like it's waiting for me to stop moving. So I'm going to talk. I'm going to tell you everything while I still remember it clean and sharp and not chewed. My name's Martinez. I was part of a 5-man response team. Commander Coleman, Matthews, Fields, Torres, and me. We were the kind of people you send in when something goes wrong, but you don't want the public to ever know there was a wrong in the first place. Level Black Response, they called it. Helix Ion Labs lit up all our pagers at 3:12. We were at the airfield by 3:30, geared up by 3:45, already sweating under armor that always felt a little heavier when the call came with no briefing attached. We got what passed for a briefing in the back of a vibrating transport, strapped into those metal benches that dig into your spine. Red light, stale air, gas fumes, the whine of the engine. Coleman stood in front of us with one hand on an overhead strap to steady himself, helmet clipped to his belt like he didn't need it. He was ex-military, all square jaw and dead calm eyes. The kind of guy who made you want to stand up straighter even when you were already sitting. "Listen up," he said. "You already know the basics, but I'm going to say it again." He pulled a laminated card from his vest and held it up like a teacher with a cheat sheet. I'd seen that card 100 times in training, but never on an actual op. Most teams never saw a level black outside a classroom slide deck. At the top, stamped in red, it said, Helixian Incident Response, Level Black. Revision 7B, Do Not Distribute. Underneath was the rulebook. We all knew it, but he read it anyway, because that's what you do when you're scared and don't want anyone to notice. Operational notes, he said, voice steady. Memorize it. Again, his finger traced each line. Rule 1. If comms fail, you do not attempt to restore them from inside the facility. You exfil first. No exceptions. Fields snorted softly. Feels a little late for that one. You gotta look from Coleman and shut up. Rule 2. Do not respond to any voice that uses your full name unless you have direct visual confirmation of the speaker. Torres rolled his wrist like he'd heard it too many times. Because of the parrots, right? He muttered to me, smirking. I shrugged. I'd heard a dozen different reasons. Audio hallucinations, bad acoustics, mimetic subjects that picked up speech like songbirds. It always sounded like overkill until the card was in somebody's hand and the transport floor vibrated under your boots. Coleman went on. Rule 3. If a subject stops moving, you do not approach to confirm. You maintain distance and treat it as adaptive, not neutralized, unless ordered otherwise. That one always rubbed me wrong. It sounded cowardly the first time you heard it. Then you watched the training videos and you understood. Things twitched long after they should have been dead. Sometimes they weren't twitching. Rule 4, he said, pausing just a hair too long. If you notice the facility temperature rising while the thermostats read normal, you exit the affected area immediately. Do not stay to investigate environmental anomalies. That one sounded stupid. It always had. Temperature? Out of all the shit they were messing with, they're worried about the HVAC? But it was on the card, so it mattered to someone. And Rule 5. If you reach the generator room, you have one task. Place charges, arm them, and exit via the service tunnel. Do not deviate. Do not return for equipment or bodies. Tunnel lock code will be provided to team lead only. Deceptively safe. That's how I'd always thought of Rule 5. Like it was the one light at the end of the hallway. You get to the generator, you blow the place, You leave through the tunnel, you go home. Simple, clean, a neat little escape hatch written in black and white. Spoiler, it wasn't. Coleman slid the card back into his vest. We're going to rescue any survivors we can, figure out what the hell happened, place the charges, and get out. Standard search and scuttle. Questions. Matthews raised 2 fingers lazily. He was our tech. Pale-eyed, hair buzzed to the scalp, always fiddling with some piece of gear. Any intel on what they were cooking down there? He asked. Just so I know what to be terrified of in advance. Need to know, Coleman said. And you don't. Fields made a show of looking around the transport. So that's a no, then. I leaned my head back against the bulkhead and shut my eyes. Helix Ion had been a rumor standing between soldiers and scientists for years. A place where you ship problems that didn't fit into neat boxes. Gene drives, CRISPR on steroids, synthetic pathogens, chimeras. The one thing everybody agreed on was the location. Middle of nowhere, surrounded by more nowhere, buried under enough concrete to make a bunker jealous. I'd seen photos once in a briefing. Clean white labs, smiling people in badges. All generic as hell. It didn't match what we found when the birds set us down. We touched down just after dawn. Fog sat low and heavy across the tree-line, hanging there like it didn't want to let go. The rotors spun hot air into it, pushed it aside in ragged streaks. And then the moment we stepped off the ramp, it swallowed us again, damp and cold and thick with the smell of wet leaves and something underneath. Metal, maybe? Burnt plastic. I remember the way my boots sounded on the cracked asphalt, like walking over bones in a graveyard. The gate loomed out of the fog. It should have been shut, steel and razor wire and warnings in big block letters. Instead, it sagged open, one side ripped half off its hinges, bent outward, not inward. Like something inside had decided it was done staying put. Friendly welcome, Torres muttered, scanning the tree line through his scope. Eyes up, Coleman said. Stay tight. We moved through the gate in a staggered line, rifles up, tracking invisible targets. My heart hammered against the plate carrier. The fog felt wrong down there. Sound didn't carry right. My own breathing seemed too loud, and everything else seemed muffled, like somebody had thrown a blanket over the world. Helix Ion Labs looked like every other anonymous government building from the outside. Concrete, slit windows, blank facades. The kind of place you drive past 1,000 times and never really see. Up close, you saw the details. The front doors were blown outward. Thick glass, spider-webbed, and shattered in heaps on the steps. An overhead sign that had probably once said Helixian Biotechnologies was hanging by one bracket, the letters twisted and blackened. There were smears, too. Dark streaks on the walls, handprints on the glass. Some brown, some red, some a color I couldn't name. Parts of the doorway looked melted. I already hate this, Field said, voice tight under the forced casual tone. Just putting that out there. You hated the last 6 ops, Matthews replied. Yeah, and it kept us alive, Field shot back. That's called consistency, my guy. Cut the chatter, Coleman said. Martinez on me. Matthews, rear. Fields, Torres, flanks. Safety off. We are not in training anymore. The second we stepped inside, the temperature dropped. You know that feeling when you walk into a freezer from a humid street? How the air sticks to your skin, not in a wet way, but in a you're not supposed to be breathing this way. It felt like that. My exhale turned white for a second, and then the fog swallowed it. The power was down. Emergency lights pulsed along the ceiling, washing everything in a suffocating red haze. Not solid red, either. Heartbeat red. On-off. On-off. Enough to make shadows jump and your depth perception go to shit. The only constant sound was the faint hum of our gear, the occasional creak of stressed metal, and the hiss of steam from somewhere far off. Every footstep echoed, like we were in a cathedral built underground. Comms check, Matthews said quietly. Alpha, you're good. Bravo good. Charlie good. We're on local only. No signal beyond 100 meters. Outside networks are dead. Dead how? Torres asked. Dead like jammed or dead like unplugged. Dead like I'm not even seeing ambient noise, Matthews said. Like nothing's there to be heard. Like somebody cut the world off at the root. That sat wrong with me. Comms could be jammed. They could be scrambled. But silence? True silence? That wasn't normal. We pushed past reception. The first thing that hit me was the smell. You hear people talk about the smell of death, and you think you know what they mean. Rotting meat, roadkill, maybe a bad fridge. This wasn't that. This was layers. Burnt meat, like someone had grilled a person and left them. Coppery blood, sour stomach acid. Underneath all of it, sharp and chemical, a reek that clawed at the back of my throat and made my eyes water. Like hospital sterilizer turned up to 11 and mixed with melted plastic. I swallowed bile and kept moving. We found a first body by the reception desk. Body is generous. He was in a lab coat, or what was left of it. Latex gloves half melted to his hands. His ID badge hung from a torn lanyard, swinging gently in the artificial breeze. His torso, if you can call it that, was open like someone had dropped a grenade inside him. Ribs splayed outward, white against wet red. His insides glistened on the floor in a mess of tissue, dark clots, and something that looked like jelly. Clear. Wrong. It wasn't just trauma. There were places where his flesh had flowed, like wax, into the cracks in the floor before it hardened. Jesus, Fields whispered. For once, no joke. Torres' jaw clenched. Animal attack, he managed. Coleman didn't even look at him. He just swept his rifle over the corners, checking angles. No animal can do this, he said. Behind the reception desk, the wall was smeared in handprints and streaks. Someone had dipped their fingers in their own blood and written one word, big and shaky and desperate. Run. Next to it, crooked and half-stuck, was a yellow post-it note. It was torn, edges soaked through red, but there was handwriting on it, neat and cramped. Incident report 47B, see attached. They copy. Not just sounds. The rest was obscured where blood had run over it and dried. Martinez, Coleman said, nodding toward it. I peeled the note off the wall. It came away with a sticky noise, leaving a square of clean paint behind. I stuffed it into the clear pocket on my forearm. I don't know why. Habit. Keeping evidence. Something in the back of my skull whispering that if someone had taken the time to write a note while everything was going to shit, it mattered. We pushed deeper into the facility. The East Hall was a mess. Bullet casings littered the floor. Scorch marks tracked up the walls, and across the ceiling, black streaks where something had burned too hot. Lab coats lay crumpled in corners like shed skins. Most of them were empty. In one alcove, we found a body that stopped us all cold. It looked like somebody had tried to put him through the wall and halfway succeeded. His hips and legs were sticking out into the hallway, bare feet twisted at angles that made my joints ache just to look at them. From the waist up, he was just gone. No blood spray. No ragidole. The wall around his midsection bulged slightly, the paint stretched thin. I stepped closer. The emergency light flashed, and for a second, I saw texture under the paint that wasn't concrete. It was smooth and pale. Back, Coleman snapped. I stepped away, heart thudding. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I touched the wall, it would be warm. Is that a weld? Fields asked, squinting. That's not in our job description, Matthews said tightly. We're not engineers. We move on. The main elevators were dead, doors bent inward like tin foil. The shafts were black pits that ate our flashlight beams. We could have climbed down, but Matthews shook his head before anyone asked. Power's out, he said. Brake locks might fail. We're not rolling those dice. So we took the maintenance stairs. They were narrow and steep, metal steps that rattled under our boots. Everything echoed in there. Our breathing, a dropped shell casing, the faint drip of water, or something thicker, down the railings. Sublevel 1 went by fast. Offices, admin sublevel 2 was storage. We checked each landing out habit, but the real fun started at the door marked. Sublevel 3, genetics division. Authorized personnel only. Half the sign was melted, letters drooping down like plastic left on a hot stove. Why is it never payroll? Fields muttered. Coleman opened the door. The hall beyond looked like every lab corridor you've ever seen in a movie. White walls, glass windows, stainless steel. Except all of it was cracked, scorched, or stained. The emergency lights kept pulsing that slow red. Doors hung open or were jammed shut halfway, smashed in from the inside. That was when we heard it. A scraping sound, metal on concrete. Not regular, not rhythmic. Short bursts. Stop. Drag. Stop. Contact front. Matthews whispered. We froze. Coleman held up a fist and then pointed. Fields edged forward, rifle up, lights sweeping. Down the corridor, something pale flashed in the beam and vanished. Too fast to track. Too smooth. I felt every hair on my arms stand up under my sleeves. Stay alert, Coleman said quietly. We aren't alone. Watch your six. Rule 3 in effect. Nothing goes down unless I say it's down. We moved in formation, lights cutting through the red haze. The second body on sublevel 3 wasn't as exploded as the first one. It was worse. He was slumped against the wall, lab coat half off, his skin raw. Soft-looking like overcooked chicken. His bones weren't where bones should be. Arms and legs bent the wrong way. Joints where there shouldn't be joints, like someone had stirred his skeleton with a stick before it set again. His face had melted around the contours of his skull. Eyes sunk deep, lips pulled back tight enough to see every tooth. What the fuck could do this? Torres whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Then we heard breathing. Not ours. Not vaguely distant. Close. Slow. Heavy. Wet somehow, like each inhale dragged through fluid. It came from the darkness ahead. Under a door frame it should have had to duck under. Instead, it just slid into view. It was tall. Too tall. If it stood up straight, it would have scraped the ceiling, but moved in a hunched glide, limbs coiled like springs that could snap any direction. Skin pale and almost luminous in the emergency red, stretched tight over muscles that bunched and flexed wrong under it. Its jaw hung open, unhinged, swinging slightly. Teeth lined the inside in black, needle-thin rows. They looked rotten and sharp at the same time, like something that didn't grow but was forced. The worst part was the eyes. They were dark but not empty, tracking us with a focus that was human. Curious. Cold. Like it was trying to decide which of us to eat first and wanted to make an informed decision. For half a second, nobody moved. We were all animals again, staring at the predator that had just stepped out of the brush. Coleman broke the spell. He fired. The sound in the cramped hallway was deafening. Muzzle flash lit the walls. I saw the rounds hit the thing's chest and shoulder in bursts, flesh jerking, dark spray hitting the glass behind it. It moved. Moved is the wrong word. 1 second, it was in front of us. The next, it was in the middle of our line, like the frames between were missing. It hit Fields. He didn't even have time to scream at first. It slammed him down so hard his rifle skittered away, then pinned his arms with limbs that bent at 2 extra joints. Claws, if you can call them that, jutted from its hands like splintered bone, and it drove them into him with a horrible wet punch. Then it made a sound. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a growl. It was laughter, distorted, like it was coming through blown speakers. A chuckling, glitching sound that rose too fast and then cut off. Fields screamed then, high and raw. We opened fire. All of us. Tracers stitched the air. The smell of burnt propellant slammed into the chemical stink already there. Bullets hit the creature's back, its side, its head. Bits of pale flesh flew off in chunks. It didn't fall. For the first 3 seconds, it didn't even flinch. Then it let out a shriek that stopped my heart. The pitch wasn't right. It climbed past the range of human hearing, but didn't stop, kept going until my vision blurred at the edges. My teeth hurt. I tasted blood as something in my nose popped. I don't remember dropping to one knee, but I did. My hand shook around the rifle. It felt like someone had shoved ice picks into my ears and twisted. By the time my vision cleared, it was gone. Fields wasn't. There wasn't even enough of him left to make a proper body bag. Just shredded armor, torn cloth, and a pool of red full of unidentifiable bits. His helmet lay intact, visor cracked, lying at a wrong angle that made it look like he was still attached to it. He wasn't. "Shit," Matthews said, voice paper thin. "Eyes up," Coleman barked, though his voice shook too. "We don't moor him here. We move. It's wounded. That means it's dangerous. It should be dead," Torres said. "You saw how many rounds we—" "Rule 3, Coleman snapped. "You treat it as adaptive until I tell you otherwise." We pushed on, because what else were we going to do? Go back up and tell the pilot there was a ghost in the hallway. The control room for Sublevel 3 was half flooded with flickering monitors and the smell of overheated electronics. Matthews got one of the consoles to power up off the backup grid. Most of the screens spat static. A couple showed camera feeds from empty corridors. The rest were dead. "Everything's corrupted," Matthews muttered, fingers moving over the keyboard. "Logs, access records, video. It's like somebody took a magnet to the system and then shot it for good measure." "Anything we can use?" Coleman asked. "1 second." Matthews clicked through folders, brow furrowed. "There's one file that's not completely fucked." He pulled it up. The main monitor flickered. Resolution was bad, audio worse, but we could make out the room. A containment cell. White walls draining the floor, monitoring equipment along one side. A man lay strapped to a table, thin and pale in a hospital gown. He was screaming. Even with the sound warped and glitching, I could tell. His throat strained. He arched off the table as far as the restraints would allow. His spine bowed, so hard I thought it would snap. Beads of sweat stood out on his skin, then turned into rivulets, then into something else. Under his skin, something moved. You know how it looks when an animal has parasites, and you see movement under the fur? It was like that, but faster, larger. His veins bulged, his chest heaved in shapes that weren't breathing. Then his skin split, not all at once. Little tears at first, wet lines opening over his ribs, his arms, his neck. A dark fluid seeped out, then something pale and tapered pushed through. He screamed until his voice shredded. His face was the last thing to go. Something pushed up from inside, flattening his features from underneath. The skin over his cheekbones ripped open, and something white and segmented slid out like the world's worst butterfly. The thing that crawled out of him dropped to the floor on all fours, slick and new and already wrong. It looked like the thing that killed Fields, but smaller, less filled out. It shook itself like a dog, scattering viscera. The man on the table, what was left of him, twitched once and then went limp. The file name at the bottom of the screen burned itself into my memory. Subject 47B, Regeneration Trial. Status, escalated. My forearm itched with a post-it with 47B on it pressed into my skin. "Yeah, I'm done," Torres said, stepping back from the monitor like it could reach him through the screen. "We set the charges, we leave. Fuck the survivors. They're not survivors. They're those. There could be clean sectors," Matthews said weakly. "Other divisions. Housing. Not everybody in this place was a volunteer. And not everybody gets a rescue." Torres snapped back. "We're 4 now. You want to drag some half-melted scientist back through that thing in the hallway?" "Enough," Coleman barked. He looked at the screen one last time, jaw tight, and then killed the feed. The room went darker without the glow. "The mission stands," he said. "We locate any confirmed survivors in our path. We place charges in the generator room, and we exit via the tunnel. This facility does not exist after that." "Understood. No disrespect, Commander," Torres said, "but this is beyond our training. We should call for a full." "Comms are dead," Coleman said. "Rule 1 says we exfil before we try to fix that. The only exfil is past the generator room. That means the only way out is through. You want to argue with Rule 1? Take it up with the people who wrote the card after we're out." I looked at him. He knew, just like we all did, that after we're out was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Nobody else argued. Not because we agreed, but because there was nowhere else to go. Sublevel 4 was worse. The stairwell down was damp, the metal steps slick with a thin sheen of something that wasn't water. The smell hit us halfway down, sour and sweet and rotten. My eyes watered. My throat burned. "Feels like a greenhouse," Matthews muttered. "But like if the plants were made of meat." The door to sublevel 4 stuck halfway open. Something had swollen in the frame. Coleman put his shoulder into it, and it tore free with a tearing sound that set my teeth on edge. The hallway beyond wasn't like the others. The white walls and clean lines were still there if you squinted, but they bulged and dipped in places they shouldn't. Patches of a dark, wet-looking material clung to surfaces like mold. It pulsed subtly like it was breathing. My boot stuck slightly with each step, like the floor had a thin layer of tacky resin on it. "Environmental anomalies," Torres muttered. "What was Rule 4 again?" I remember the card. "If the facility temperature rises while the thermostats read normal." I glanced at the digital readout on the wall. 21 degrees Celsius. Normal. Sweat ran down my back under the armor. My breath felt thick, not from exertion, but like the air had weight. "Commander," I said slowly, "it's getting hotter." "I know," he said. "We're in and out. No sightseeing. If it gets worse, we pull back." From the ceiling ahead, something dropped. It hit the floor in the circle of our lights with a wet slap and then skittered away, too fast to track, pale limbs blurring. "Left," Matthew shouted. "Eastbourne." The emergency lights pulsed. In that strobing red, we saw them. Dozens of pale shapes clinging to the walls and ceiling like spiders. Their bodies were humanish, but only halfway. Limbs too long, joints backwards, spines arched. Some had hands with too many fingers. Some had stumps where faces should have been, with holes instead of features. They moved in quick jerks, bones cracking audibly as they crawled, clung, dropped. I don't remember who fired first this time. Probably all of us at once. The hallway erupted. Muzzle flashes strobed faster than the emergency lights. Pale bodies dropped, shrieking, but more kept coming, pouring from ceiling vents, pushing out of bulges in the walls. One landed on Torres. It hit his thigh, claws digging straight through his armor like it was cloth. He screamed, dropped to one knee, rifle clattering away. I swung toward him and squeezed the trigger. The rounds hit the creature's upper body and blew most of it off him in a spray of flesh and some kind of clear, viscous fluid that burned holes in the floor where it fell. "Get off!" Torres yelled, voice cracking, his hands scrabbling at his leg. At first I thought I'd succeeded. The thing slid away in pieces, twitching. Then I saw the tendrils. Thin, translucent filaments, like slick worms or lengths of glass noodles, writhed where its stomach had burst open. They were already pushed through the punctures in Torres' pants, burrowing into his skin, disappearing under it. He screamed again. It was different this time. Higher. Panicked. "Hold still," I shouted, grabbing for my knife. His skin moved under my hands. Little ripples shot out from the entry points, racing up his thigh, across his hip. A dark blotch spread under his veins, branching. "No, no, no, no," he gasped, trying to claw at his own leg. His fingernails ripped his skin, but didn't catch whatever was underneath. "Get it out, get out." "Back," Coleman bellowed. "Back now." I hesitated. I'm not proud of that. It was Torres, guy who always had a joke on the transport, who cheated at cards, who bitched about the coffee. You don't just leave someone like that on the floor. The tendrils reached his torso and his back arched. I heard something inside him tear with a wet ripping sound. His scream turned into a gurgle as blood frothed at his lips. Then the others descended. They swarmed him, not like animals, mindless, more like workers, efficient. Their tendrils, as we'd seen with the first one, dug into him anywhere they could find purchase. They opened him up piece by piece. Flesh bulged and popped. Bones slid where they shouldn't. He stopped moving in a way that means dead to a normal person, but his body didn't. It kept shifting, twitching, filling out. "Martinez!" Coleman snapped. He grabbed the back of my vest, and hauled me backward with more strength than looked possible for his size. Rule 3. We do not approach. We fall back. I stumbled, almost went down, and then forced my legs to move. We fired as we retreated, trying to thin the swarm, but the rounds meant less and less. They flowed over him, around him, into him. By the time we sealed the bulkhead door to sublevel 4, Torres was no longer a shape recognizably human. Through the reinforced porthole in the door, I saw his body bulge, distend, and then hang from the wall, swollen and semi-translucent. Like an egg sac. That's the image that haunts me when I close my eyes. Not the first creature. Not Fields. Torres hanging there, half dissolved, with things moving inside him like unborn spiders. I don't know how long we stood there, panting, staring through the glass. "Commander," Matthews said eventually, voice flat, "we are now at 50% strength and surrounded by shit that shouldn't exist. We should call this off." "Can't," Coleman said. He sounded tired. He leaned his forehead briefly against the cool metal of the door and then pushed off it. "We don't get to leave this place intact. If we go topside without blowing it, they'll just send another team, and maybe the next one won't get as close as we did. We're here now. That means we finish it. You still think we could do that with 3 bodies?" Matthews said, "Because I feel like the math is against us." I should have backed him up. I didn't. I was still seeing Torres' face, the moment before it stopped being a face. "Generator rooms on the far side of this level," Coleman said. "We're cutting across the central security wing. They'll have schematics. Maybe a manual override for any automated defenses." "Automated defenses," Matthews repeated. "Please let there be automated defenses." We moved. I noticed it gradually, the temperature. It was cooler again. The sweat on my back dried in a tacky layer. The air lost that humid thickness and turned crisp, sharp with the scent of antiseptic and ozone. Whatever was growing in sublevel 4, we'd left its immediate influence behind. I didn't relax. I don't think I'll ever relax again. Matthews had a handheld scanner clipped to his vest. It pinged occasionally as we passed certain sections, little blips of motion. Some are stationary. Some move slowly in patterns that might have been patrols or might have been random. None of them were small. "I've got multiple readings," he said. "Faint. Lots of erratic movement. Some are stationary, but pulsing, like they're breathing. Or, I don't know, something else. Could be survivors," I said before I could stop myself. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Doubt it," Matthews replied immediately. "No one could have survived that. Not as human." Coleman exhaled slowly. "You're both right," he said. "But we check anyway. Rulebook says all possible survivors are to be accounted for before scuttle. We don't ignore that because it's inconvenient. Rulebook can come down here and do a head count itself," Matthews muttered, but it was quiet enough that Coleman pretended not to hear it. We followed the scanner's strongest ping. The sound reached us first, singing, faint at the edge of hearing, then growing as we turned the next corner. A simple melody, lilting and slow. My brain recognized it before I did. "Is that?" I trailed off. "Lullaby," Matthews said, voice hushed. "Twinkle, twinkle." But wrong. He was right. The notes were off by half a beat, lagging just behind where they should have been, like whoever, or whatever, was singing it had learned it secondhand and was remembering it badly. It stopped, then started again. Looping. Imperfect. "When you were talking about parrots earlier," Matthews said quietly to Torres' absence, "I was kidding." My skin crawled. Rule 2 flashed in my mind, uninvited. Do not respond to any voice that uses your full name unless you have direct visual confirmation of the speaker. It didn't say anything about songs, about familiar melodies. "Eyes open," Coleman said. "Safety off." The corridor opened into a larger chamber, maybe a repurposed storage bay. The air was hotter in there. Not as bad as sublevel 4, but enough that sweat broke out along my hairline again. The smell was worse than anything we'd encountered so far. Rot. Pure rot. Not just meat, but meat that had been left in a sealed car in summer for a week, then stirred. The ceiling was low enough that I didn't want to stand up straight. Cables dangled from it in thick clusters, hanging down like vines. They swayed with the faint air currents, brushing against each other wetly. I thought they were cables at first. Then one brushed my shoulder. It left a smear. "Vet. Warm. Don't move," Matthews whispered. I looked up. The ceiling wasn't metal. It was flesh. Not all of it. There were still girders and panels, but between them, something else had grown. Pinkish, veined tissue with a slick sheen, bulging down in places into sacs and flaps. Embedded in it, like barnacles on the hull of some nightmare ship, were mouths. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Big, small, some with lips, some without. Some had teeth, some were just ringed with soft tissue. They puckered and twitched in unison, the corners of their lips cracking, bloodless. The cables were not cables. They were long strands of tissue, tubular, lined with tiny muscles. Tongues, intestines, something in between. They dangled down over us, tips questing through the air like they were smelling. Some of the mouths were mouthing words silently, shapes that didn't match any language I knew. Others were singing, low, off-key. The lullaby again, broken into pieces, different mouths carrying different notes. It was coordinated somehow, but not quite right. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. The mouth stopped singing. For a second, everything went still. Then they screamed, all at once. Every mouth opened wide, some wide enough to split the flesh around them. And the sound that came out was layered. High and low, human and animal, shrieking and roaring and sobbing. It hit us like a physical force. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head, scraping along the bones. Matthews, to his credit, didn't freeze. He lifted his rifle and opened fire on the ceiling. Rounds tore into the flesh. Chunks flew. Thick, dark blood, if you could call it that, rained down in heavy drops. Some of it hit the floor and hissed, eating into the tiles with a chemical sizzle. One drop landed on my sleeve and smoked. I slapped it off, felt a burn underneath. The mouths kept screaming. The tendril that had touched me earlier lashed out again, faster. This time it didn't go for me. It snapped to the side and wrapped around Matthew's neck. One moment he was standing, the next he was on his toes, boots scraping the floor, hands clawing at the slick tube constricting his throat. His eyes bulged, veins standing out in his forehead. "Grab him," I shouted, lurching forward. Coleman fired at the tendril, but the angle was bad. There was a good chance he'd hit Matthews instead. The sound, those screams, made my aim wobble. I grabbed Matthews' legs and yanked. The tendril held. The flesh of the ceiling stretched like taffy. Matthews' face went from red to purple. I pulled again, harder, teeth gritted. My boots slipped in the blood on the floor. Something popped. The tendril tore loose. So did half of Matthews' throat. We fell backward in a tangled heap. Warm wetness hit my face, my chest. For a second, I didn't understand what it was. Then I felt Matthews convulse in my arms. He tried to breathe. Air whistled through the ragged gap where his throat had been. Blood bubbled and sprayed. His eyes rolled, unfocused, then fixed on mine. He mouthed something. I'll never know what. He died in my lap, eyes open, pupils blown wide. The mouths above us stopped screaming. They started laughing. Not in unison, not like one mind. In fragments. Little bursts of giggles, chuckles, snorts, all layered over each other. Some high, some low. Some sounded like children, some like old women, some like men laughing at a bar. I could hear familiar cadences in there. Little echoes of voices I'd heard in my life. My mother, a drill sergeant, a teacher. One of them laughed like Fields. Something in me snapped. Coleman must have felt the same way, because he didn't hesitate. He ripped an incendiary grenade from his belt, thumbed the pin off, and hurled it into the densest cluster of mouths. "Cover," he shouted. We turned away, huddling against the nearest wall as the grenade went off with a thick thump and a rush of heat. Fire washed across the ceiling. The flesh caught like dry brush, going from pink to black in seconds. The mouth shrieked, not in harmony now, but individually, a chorus of dying things. Hot, oily smoke filled the chamber. The smell was indescribable. Cooked meat, burnt hair, plastic, rubber, all layered. I gagged, coughed, my eyes streaming. My lungs burned. The tongues writhed and then went still, charred stumps dropping to the floor with soft thuds. When the worst of it was over, we staggered out of the chamber, half blind, dragging each other. Matthew stayed behind on the floor where he'd fallen. I didn't even get to close his eyes. There were two of us now, Coleman and me. We didn't say anything for a solid minute, just leaned against the corridor wall, trying to breathe air that didn't taste like crematorium smoke. Finally, Coleman straightened. His face was streaked with soot. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot. "We keep moving," he said. His voice was raw. "To where?" I asked. It came out harsher than I meant. "There's nothing left to." He pointed down the hallway. The sign above the next intersection read, "Security Wing, Central, Generator Access." "Generators beyond security," he said. "We get there, we do the job, we leave. That's all we have left. And if there's more of that..." I jerked my thumb back toward the burned chamber. The heat still washed out from it, carrying with it the stink of charred lips and ash. "Then we improvise," he said. "This is what we signed up for." It wasn't. Not really. None of the recruitment posters had shown anything like this. But arguing wouldn't bring Fields or Torres or Matthews back. It wouldn't erase the image of Torres' body hanging like a sack or Matthews' mouth, forming a word around whole. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. We walked. The security wing was the first place that looked like people had tried to fight back with something more than panic. Barricades made of flipped desks and metal cabinets lined parts of the hallway. There were bullet impact patterns on the walls, tight clusters from trained shooters. Blood trails led to locked doors and ended there. We found another incident report, printed and stamped, lying in a smear of something brown. I picked it up. It was half burned, the edges curled. Incident. Subject 47B. Behavioral escalation. Notes. Vocal mimicry confirmed. Response protocol updated. Do not engage in verbal exchange. Do not attempt de-escalation. Do not respond to use of personal names, familiar phrases, or emotional appeals. Subject retains access to PRE modification memories. Pre-modification memories. My stomach turned. I slid the report into the same pocket as the post-it. The plastic crinkled. We hit the main control room for the security wing. Backup power was still limping along here, fed by some battery bank that hadn't gotten the memo about the apocalypse downstairs. Flickering lights came on as we entered, bathing everything in a sickly white. Rows of monitors lined the walls, showing feeds from different parts of the facility. Most were static. A few were black, but a handful still showed something. Shapes. Some were hunched in cells, banging their heads slowly against reinforced glass. Some were sprawled in contorted positions, twitching. A few stood perfectly still in the middle of their rooms, staring directly into the camera. Their eyes followed us as we moved across the control room. That's how it felt, anyway. Coleman moved to the panel, fingers flying over the controls. He brought up a schematic of the facility. "Generator rooms here," he said, tapping a block on sublevel 5. "Service tunnel access is built into the maintenance substructure. Single entrance from the generator. Single exit into the forest. No other way out underground that doesn't go through sealed blast doors." I swallowed. Forest. I thought it would feel like a promise of safety. It didn't. Not anymore. "Look," I said, pointing to one of the monitors. One of the cells was labeled. Subject 47B, restricted. The feed showed a room much like the one from the earlier video. But the table was empty. The straps were broken. The drain in the floor was clogged with something dark. The camera was tilted slightly, like something had hit it. In the back corner of the cell, where the angle distorted, something moved. A long, pale limb, boneless looking, dragged briefly across the floor and out of frame. "Great," I muttered. "Our friend got house privileges." Coleman's jaw tightened. "We are not here to play zookeeper," he said. "We're here to kill the zoo." He keyed in commands, probably arming what internal lockdown systems still functioned. I let my eyes drift across the other monitors, not wanting to, but unable to help it. One showed a room full of animals, dogs, maybe, or wolves, that weren't quite either anymore. Their limbs were jointed wrong, their faces too flat or too elongated. They lay in a heap, breathing in sync. Another showed what looked like a nursery. Rows of small cribs, the kind with mesh sides. Each one held something wrapped in cloth. The cloth moved. The camera's microphone, barely functional, picked up a chorus of soft coos. I turned away. That was when something shifted onto the control panel. A soft scrape, metal on metal. I took a step back, raising my rifle. "Commander," I said, "we've got..." The panel in front of Coleman bulged outward, as if someone were pushing on it from the inside. The screws holding in place popped, one by one, with sharp metallic pings. Coleman froze, his hands still on the controls. The bulge split. A pale, many-jointed arm slid out, fingers splayed. They weren't quite fingers. Not enough bones. Too many knuckles. It found the edge of the console, gripped it, and pulled. The top half of something hauled itself up from the guts of the control room, unfolding. It was bigger than the creature that had taken Fields. More complete. Its muscles were defined, its movements smoother. Skin stretched taut, almost glossy. Its chest had seams where different textures of flesh met, stitched seamlessly together. Its head turned toward us. Its eyes weren't dark this time. They were a patchwork, one brown, one blue, one milky and filmed over, all set into a face that wasn't one face, but several blended. Cheekbones didn't match. Jawline shifted slightly, as if it couldn't decide on a final shape. Its mouth opened, not horizontally, but vertically, splitting its head in half from chin up. Rows of black, needle teeth lined the inside. Behind those, more teeth. Behind those, darkness. It looked at me. I saw pieces of people I knew in it. Not just the team. Faces from training. A colonel who'd briefed us once. A scientist I'd seen in a photo. Eyes I recognized, but couldn't place. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They were just present. Borrowed. Coleman's hand went to his belt, groping for another grenade. The creature moved faster. It dropped fully onto the console, crushing it, and hit him like a truck. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and broken metal. The sound of impact was sickening. "Commander!" I shouted. He didn't scream right away. He grunted, breath driving out of him, then snarled as he drove his knife into its side again and again. His other hand pushed against its throat, or where its throat would have been if its anatomy made sense, keeping its endless mouth inches from his face. "Run," he gasped between stabs. "Martinez, run. That's an order. Tunnel, code 8-5-9-3. Do it." I hesitated. God help me, I hesitated. I could have emptied my mag into it. Could have tried to yank it off him. Could have done something other than stand there for that crucial heartbeat. By the time I shouldered my rifle, it had him. Its limbs, so many limbs, wound around him like constrictors. Bone claws punched into his chest plate, then through it, then through him. I heard ribs crack, split, tear. Blood poured out in hot gushes. He still fought. Coleman stabbed it in the eye, the brown one. The blade went up to the hilt. The creature barely flinched. The milky I rolled, then refocused. It started tearing him apart. It was efficient. That's the worst part. No wild thrashing, just methodical disassembly. It pulled his arm off at the shoulder with a single wrench. The sound was wet and cracking. It ripped armor free, turned his torso into a red ruin. He made a sound, then, like a laugh and a sob strangled together. Then nothing. I fired. Rounds slammed into it, punching holes in the patchwork flesh. Black fluid sprayed. It turned toward me slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Coleman, or what was left of him, slid to the floor in pieces. My mag ran dry. The rifle clicked empty. The creature didn't take a step toward me. It just watched. Then it spoke. It didn't move its mouth to match the words. The sound came from somewhere deep inside it, layered and wrong, but I understood. It was Coleman's voice. Not an impression, not an AI imitation. His voice, the one that had woken me up at 3:12, telling me to get my ass in gear, that this was the one we trained for. Martinez, it said, don't leave me. The hair on my neck stood up. Rule 2. Do not respond to any voice that uses your full name unless you have direct visual confirmation of the speaker. Do not respond to familiar phrases or emotional appeals. Subject retains access to pre-modification memories. It took a step forward, one arm reaching out. 3 hands open, palms up. They looked almost gentle. Help me, it said, and there were other voices in there too. Higher, lower, Torres, Matthews, Fields, all mashed together, pleading. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to bolt, but my legs felt like they were wading through mud. The charges, the generator, the tunnel. Rule 5. If you reach the generator room, you have one task: place charges, arm them, and exit via the service tunnel. Do not deviate. I didn't remember consciously making a decision. One moment I was in the control room, the next I was in the hallway, boots hammering the floor, lungs on fire. My vision tunneled. The world narrowed to doorways, signs. The blinking dots on the schematic burned into my brain. I don't remember placing the charges in the generator room. Not exactly. I remember the hum of the machinery, deep and low. I remember the floor vibrating under my feet, the smell of hot metal. I remember my hands shaking so hard I fumbled the first detonator. I remember entering the code on the tunnel door keypad, 8593. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my body, but they hit the right number somehow. The door hissed open, revealing a narrow, concrete tunnel lit by failing emergency strips along the floor. The air in there was cooler. It smelled like dirt and dust and faintly of ozone. I threw myself into it like it was the only sane place left on Earth. The last thing I heard before the door sealed behind me was Coleman's voice, echoing down the corridor in that layered, broken chorus. Martinez, it said, please, don't go. The emergency strips led me down and then up again. The tunnel felt like it went on forever. The hum of the generator behind me grew louder, then softer, then was replaced by a deep, distant rumble. When the charges blew, the floor jumped under my feet. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lights flickered and went out, then came back dimmer than before. I stumbled onward, lungs burning, until I saw daylight ahead. Real daylight, pale and gray through a heavy metal hatch. I pushed it open, climbed out, and realized with a sick jolt exactly where Rule 5 had led me. Forest. The same forest that surrounds me now, where something is pacing just beyond the trees. From the ridge where the hatch spit me out, I could see part of the facility through gaps in the foliage. Concrete cracked, walls caved in, smoke rising from somewhere deep inside. The explosion hadn't leveled it completely, but it had broken its spine. For about 30 seconds, I thought maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Then the rubble moved. Concrete slabs shifted as something pushed up from beneath. Rebar twisted like vines. Holes opened where once there had been walls. From those holes, shapes crawled out. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They spread in all directions, pale against the dark earth. Some moved on 2 legs, some on 4, some on too many to count. They bled into the tree-line, swallowed up by shadows. Rule 5 had promised safety. It had just led me to the last place on Earth I wanted to be when Heliction's children finally came home. I've been hiding in these woods for 3 hours now, hunched under roots and behind rocks. Phone pressed against my chest to dim the light. My radio's dead. My team is gone. The world, as far as anyone out here knows, is exactly the same as it was yesterday. It isn't. The forest has gone quiet. Not nighttime quiet. Not storm coming quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when every living thing decides it's safer not to exist for a while. There are tracks in the mud that don't match any animal guide I've ever seen. Handprints, hoof prints, something that looks like a child's bare foot next to something that looks like a human hand with fingers too long. I can't tell how many are out here with me. I know it's more than one. You can feel them when they pass close by. The temperature shifts. The smell changes. The trees themselves seem to lean away. My lungs hurt. My hands won't stop shaking. But I need to finish telling you what happened down there before one of them decides to follow the glow of my screen. Because this isn't over. The lab is gone, but the things it made aren't, and I've seen enough to know Helix Ion didn't just play with evolution. They hacked it. They gave it teeth. They let it out. And the worst part is, somewhere out here, in this maze of trees and fog, I've already heard my own name spoken in a voice that should not be able to speak anymore. The first time, I thought it was in my head. The second time, I knew it wasn't. The second time, it used my full name. Daniel Martinez. Clear as day, like someone had leaned right up against my ear and whispered it. My mom only ever used my full name when I was in deep shit, so there's this built-in jolt that hits your spine when you hear it like that. Parent voice. Authority voice. Hardwired. Except my mother was 2 states away, and this voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded like Coleman. Not the layered monster version. Not the broken chorus. Just him. Calm. Even. Exactly the tone he'd used in the transport. I was crouched under a fallen tree when it happened, half wedged into the hollow where the roots had ripped out of the ground and left a little cave of dirt and stones. Leaves stuck to my vest. My knees were jammed against my chest. The phone screen was dimmed low, brightness barely above 0. When I heard my name, I slapped my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't answer on instinct. Rule 2. Don't respond to any voice that uses your full name unless you can see the speaker. You think those rules are overkill until you're in the woods and your dead commander calls you like he's standing 3 feet away, and every inch of you wants to say, "Yes, sir." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the tiny sliver of forest I could see through the tangle of roots. The trees in front of me were about 20 meters away, thin trunk spaced just enough that I could see between them, but not enough to see far. The fog out here was lighter than at the facility, but it still sat in the low spots, pooling in dips in the ground like smoke that never rose. Leaves rustled, not the gentle kind. Short, sharp movements. Wait. Martinez, the Coleman voice called again. It was further left this time. You're not going to make it out alone. My heart pounded against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mouth filled with that sour taste you get before you throw up. No answer. No answer. No answer. Something big moved between the trees. I saw a shape, just for a second, where the trunks overlapped. Too tall, too thin. It stepped, and the ground itself seemed annoyed about having to hold it up. "You disobeyed a direct order," it said. "That's not like you." The words were right, but the rhythm was off by a hair. Like the lullaby. I dug my fingers into the soil, nails scraping rock. The phone buzzed in my other hand, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before I realized it was just low battery. 5%. I wanted to laugh. I'm being hunted by gene-hacked monsters, and I'm still stressed about my phone dying. The shape disappeared behind a thicker stand of trees. I heard it again, closer now. "You're not hurt, Martinez." The voice slipped around to my right. "You can move. That means you can help. There are survivors out here. We don't leave people behind." It was good. Almost perfect. It even had that little hard edge Coleman got when he was pushing someone past their comfort zone. What gave it away wasn't the sound. It was the timing. Coleman wouldn't repeat the same line 3 different ways in less than a minute. He wasn't a glitching audio file, and he sure as hell wouldn't have wandered around in circles broadcasting his position like that. The thing out there knew my habits, knew my respect for chain of command, knew how I thought. It was rummaging through Coleman's memories and pulling out tools to poke me with. Subject retains access to pre-modification memories. Incident report. Rule card. All of it clicked into place a little too late. "Come on," it said, further away now. Or maybe closer. It was impossible to tell. The sound carried weird here, bouncing off trunks, sliding through fog. You think you're the only one who got out? They ran when you ran. They're calling for help. You're just not listening. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I've been calling out on my radio earlier before it died. I tried the standard frex, then the encrypted ones. Nothing but static. No, that's not true. Worse than static. Silence. Matthews had been right. The world out here wasn't even noisy anymore. If there were other survivors, I didn't know which was worse, them dying alone or them being turned into material. I stayed put. Minutes passed. Could have been 10, could have been 30. Long enough that my legs went numb and my feet started tingling in that awful pins and needles way. The voice stopped. The forest swallowed the echo. I waited another 5 minutes, counting breaths before I dared move. Slowly, inch by inch, I wormed my way out from under the roots. Dirt cascaded down my back. A rock caught my ribs. Everything hurt in small, sharp ways layered over the big, dull ache in my chest. When I finally got clear, I stayed low, belly almost to the ground, and listened. Nothing. No birds. No insects. Just the distant creak of branches shifting in a breeze I couldn't feel down here. I risked a glance at the sky. Gray. Empty. No smoke anymore from the facility. No helicopter silhouette. No contrails. Just clouds. The forest looked normal. It wasn't. You start noticing the wrongness in little things. A tree where the bark pattern looks too much like stretched skin. A patch of moss that pulses slightly when you're not looking straight at it. A rock with a smear on it that's not mud and not blood and not any color you've seen in a living thing before. I check my mags. 2 full, 1 half. Sidearms still full. 1 knife. 1 phone on life support. Priorities. Rule 1 said you don't try to fix comms from inside. We were technically outside now, but the idea was the same. Don't waste time on toys when your exit isn't secure. I needed distance between me and the hatch. Between me and Heliction's concrete tomb. Problem was, I didn't know which way was away in any meaningful sense. Trees in every direction. No landmarks. I picked the direction opposite from where I'd seen the shapes crawling out of the rubble and started walking. After about 10 minutes, I realized the ground was sloping down, not up. That was wrong. The ridge I'd crawled out on had been higher ground. I should have been descending then, not now. I stopped, tried to orient myself, turned slowly in a circle, every movement careful, scanning. That was when I noticed the temperature. I don't mean the weather. That stayed pretty much the same, damp, cool, the kind that seeps into your clothes and sits there. I mean the way my skin felt. Where I was standing, I was fine. A little chilled. Breath visible when I exhaled. Standard. 3 steps to the left, the air felt thicker, warmer. Like walking toward a heater with a blanket over it. My breath stopped fogging. I stepped back. Visible exhale again. I checked my watch. It had a cheap built-in temp readout. 10 degrees Celsius, steady. Rule 4. If you notice the facility temperature rising while the thermostats read normal, exit the affected area immediately. Do not stay to investigate environmental anomalies. I hadn't given a shit about that one in the briefing. Right now, it was the only compass I had. I took a small stick and held it out, moving it sideways slowly. Stupid, I know, but my brain wanted some kind of visual line between safe and unsafe. After about a meter, the skin on my hand started prickling. It was subtle, like a sun lamp turned on low. The stick went further into that invisible pocket of warmth. I didn't see anything shimmer or distort, just air. Something had followed the explosion up, or the forest had been seeded long before. Either way, if Helix Ion had been leaking environmental anomalies underground, there was no reason they'd stop at the concrete ceiling. Heat that wasn't real. Air that lied. I angled away until the prickling faded. My watch still lied cheerfully at 10 degrees Celsius. Okay, I whispered, mostly to myself. Fine, you want to be a haunted thermostat? I'll play. I started using it like sonar. Take a few steps. If the air got thicker, back up, adjust. It was like trying to find your way across a minefield with a blindfold and a stick. Twice I hit dead pockets, cold like walking into a fridge. Those scare me more than the hot ones. I didn't stick around to see what they meant. I climbed until the trees thinned and the underbrush opened up enough that I could see more than 10 meters ahead. That's when I spotted the cabin. It sat in a little clearing, half-eaten by the forest. Weather planks, tin roof, small stovepipe sticking out the top. A familiar shape, ranger station or surveyor shack. Government issue. A cracked solar panel leaned against one wall, half covered in leaves. An antenna jutted from a corner of the roof, bent but intact. Relief slammed into me, so hard my knees nearly buckled. Man-made structure. Radio mast. Shelter that wasn't a hole. I forced myself to stop at the tree line and watch for a full minute. No movement in the windows. No smoke from the chimney. Door closed. A couple of footprints in the mud near the front step, but they were old, edges softened by rain. Too big to be a kid. Too normal to be whatever was stalking me. I went in low and fast, sweeping the interior like it was a room in Helix Ion. One room, really. Bed against one wall. Little table. Chair. A narrow counter with a sink that probably fed off rain barrels. Shelves with manuals, old coffee cans, a rusted lantern, and a radio. It sat on the table, a self-contained unit the size of a microwave, forest service green, with a cracked plastic cover over the dials. The mic hung from a hook, coiled cable wrapped lazy loops. For a second, the sight of that stupid box almost made me cry. Ridiculous. It was just gear. I'd seen 1,000 like it. But right then it might as well have been a life raft. I checked the corners, behind the door, under the bed. No bodies. No blood. No piercing was. It smelled like dust and old coffee and mildew, which was almost pleasant compared to everything else. I closed the door gently and threw the bolt. The silence inside was different, less aware. Outside, you could feel things listening. Here, there was just the ticking of some bug in the walls and the faint hiss of my own breath. I sat at the table, hands on my knees, and just existed for a minute. Felt my heartbeat slow from full-on sprint to something like normal. Then I turned my attention to the radio. Battery indicator red dead. Not surprising. I traced the power cable to a little inverter hooked up to a car battery on the floor. The battery looked newish. No visible corrosión. There was a manual crank unit propped against the wall, the kind of thing you hope you never have to use. Of course, I grabbed the crank, slotted it into place, and started turning. It's amazing how fast your arms give out after everything else you've done in a day. My shoulders burned. My fingers cramped around the handle. I kept going, teeth bared, watching the battery indicator creep from dead to yellow to barely green. When it hit the line, I dropped the crank and switched the radio on. It hummed to life, static rolling in like distant surf. I flipped through channels, listening for anything that wasn't white noise. Copy. Repeat. Do you copy over? My heart jumped. I spun the dial back. The voice came into focus like a surfacing submarine. Tie-in base. This is Ranger Station 2. Repeat. Helix Ion base. This is Ranger Station 2. We've got reports of an explosion and possible brush fire. Do you copy over? The voice was male, mid-30s maybe, clear. A little breathless, like he'd been calling for a while. Ranger Station 2, I said automatically, fingers closing around the mic. This is Rule 1. If comms fail, you do not attempt to restore them from inside the facility. You exfil first. We were technically out, but Helixian's ghosts weren't. They'd gotten into wall panels, ceilings, radios, into people. Who's to say they couldn't ride a signal? The rational part of my brain said, you need to tell someone what's happening. Right now, before whatever crawled out of that hole makes it to a highway. The part of my brain that still believed in rules said, you don't know who you're talking to. The man on the radio tried again. Election base, comein. We've got hikers reporting tremors and smoke as far as 40 miles out. If this is a planned demolition, you're way outside your permit. Come on, folks, talk to me. Over. He sounded annoyed. Normal. The kind of annoyed you get when bureaucracy screws up your weekend, not when the world is ending. I brought the mic up to my mouth anyway. "Ranger Station 2, I said. My voice came out rough, rusty. "This is Martinez." My own last name hissed out of the speaker, layered over the ranger's voice like someone had turned two stations on at once. I froze. The hair on my arms lifted. The ranger kept talking, oblivious. "And if I don't hear back in 10 minutes, I'm escalating this up the chain and sending someone to knock on your door personally, Helix Ion. So don't." "Martinez," the second voice said again, clearer now. "You're not supposed to talk to strangers." It was my voice, not how I sound in my head. Exactly how I sound in an after-action debrief, recorded and played back on some shitty laptop speaker. I remembered one in particular, a report on a building collapse overseas. Me explaining why I'd gone back for a kid instead of waiting for backup. "They trust you," my recorded self had said then. "That's the job. They trust you, or they die." Hearing that exact line now, playing over the ranger's words, made my stomach flip. "Who is this?" the ranger was saying. "Identify yourself. Over." "Don't," my voice on the interference said. "Don't, don't, don't, don't." I yanked the power switch. The radio cut off mid-word. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I sat there, mic still in my hand, heart pounding. Could have been a fluke. Crosstalk. Some weird atmospheric thing. Or it was the facility's echo bleeding into the same baseline reality this guy was sitting in, and I just showed whoever was listening exactly where I was. I unplugged the antenna cable for good measure. Superstition, maybe, but it made me feel like I'd closed a door. No calls. No rescue. No begging some poor bastard to come into this hellhole and join my team on the wall. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 5. They weren't about logistics. They were about containment. Helix Ion had been built around things that spread by contact. Viral, genetic, mimetic. Voices that got into your head. Heat that wasn't heat. Rules that seemed paranoid until you realized they were written in blood. I stood up from the table. The room tilted for a second, then settled. There was a map on the wall. Not a very detailed one. A topographical overview of the park, with marked trails and ranger stations, and a bold red line around the restricted research zone. Helix Ion sat square in the middle of that, a gray block labeled with a long code instead of friendly name. Our position was just outside the line where some bureaucrat had decided, years ago, that liability ended. A road clipped the edge of the map about 6 miles east. 6 miles of forest between here and an actual asphalt line that led to people who had no idea evolution had just been given a rocket engine and pointed in their direction. 6 miles wasn't far, unless the trees were lying, unless the air itself was mined. I traced the route with my finger, eyes flicking to the window every few seconds. The cabin glass was old and cloudy. The forest beyond it looked like a painting. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, move at night or move now." Night meant darkness for me and them both. Daylight meant visibility, but also made me easier to see. Except half the things I'd seen today didn't care about light. The map didn't have answers. Nothing did. I was alone with a handful of rules and a gut full of fear. My phone buzzed again. For percent. A tiny notification banner at the top told me what I already knew. No service for calls, no bars for texts. But the little LTE symbol still clung on next to a single dot. Data. Barely. Posting was still an option. That was insane, but also the only thing that had worked so far. The first post had gone through. I'd seen the spinning wheel complete, the little sent check. If I could get this all out, if I could dump everything I knew into the world, then even if I didn't make it to the road, maybe somebody could read it, save themselves, recognize the signs when some thing showed up outside their house, humming a song slightly offbeat. I found a notebook on one of the shelves, spiral-bound, half full of ranger scribbles, weather notes, names, plate numbers for parked cars. I tore out a clean page and started writing bullet points with a stub of pencil. Helix Ion, level black. Subject 47B, regeneration. Mimicry, environment changes. Rules. I underlined rule 2-3 times. Then I started listing everything I noticed topside. The heat pockets, the dead zones, the way sound bent around certain trees, the unnatural silence. All the stuff you dismiss if you heard it in a horror story, because it sounds made up. I wrote fast, hand cramping. If something broke in here, if a tongue came through the ceiling or a hand through the floor, I wanted whoever found my body to have more than a corpsicle to work with. When I finished, I ripped that page out too, folded it, and shoved it into the same pocket as the post-it in the incident report. All my warnings pressed against my skin. I checked the window again. The forest looked the same. Then a bird fell out of the sky. It came down hard enough to bounce off the roof before landing in the dirt in front of the cabin. A little gray thing, sparrow maybe, wings splayed. I watched it through the glass. At first I thought it had just flown into something and broken its neck. It twitched a couple times. Normal. Nerves. Then its chest split. Not like in the video. Not a full cocoon opening. Just a seam down the breastbone, feathers parting. Something pale and wet pushed out, thumb-sized, squirming, then burrowed back in. The bird jerked, legs spasming. A thin thread, like one of those tendrils from downstairs, slid out through its eye socket, tasted the air, then slid back. The bird stood up. It shouldn't have. Its head was caving on one side. One wing hung at a wrong angle. But it got to its feet, shook itself, and hopped. Its movements were jerky at first, glitchy. Then they smoothed out. It turned its head, looked straight at the window, at me behind it. Our eyes met. In that moment, watching that damaged little thing stare at me with pure black focus, I understood something I'd only half grasped before. Regeneration wasn't about healing. It was about recycling. Helix Ion didn't need to build its perfect soldier from scratch every time. It just needed raw materials. Anything with a nervous system. Anything that could carry nerve impulses and obey signals. Humans. Dogs. Birds. Trees. The bird hopped closer to the cabin, cocked its head. Its beak opened. For a second, I braced for another voice, some horrible mimicry coming out of a feathered chest. Instead, it let out a scrap of song. Twinkle, twinkle. Offbeat. Wrong. I stepped back from the window. It watched me retreat, then gave up and flitted, or tried to flit, into the air. Its torn wing dragged, but something inside it compensated, tendrils tightening, and it managed an ugly, lopsided flight into the trees. I could have stayed here, barricaded the door, tried to ride it out. Maybe the ranger would show up, knock, call out my name, and I'd have to decide whether to open the door. Maybe the things in the forest would send their own version of him. Didn't matter. The cabin was a box in the middle of a spreading contamination zone. All hiding here would do is give me 4 walls to die against. You don't outrun evolution, but you can at least tell people which way it's coming from. I slung my rifle, checked my mags again, and opened the door. The outside air hit me with a wall of smells. Damp earth, decaying leaves, something sweet and rotten from the direction of the hatch, a faint tang of burned concrete. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Locking it felt pointless, but I did it anyway. The bird was gone. I headed east, toward where the map said the road should be. Moving quietly through a forest is harder than movies make it look. Things crunch, branches snap. Every plant you brush against whispers like a tattletale. I tried anyway. Step, pause, listen. Step. Every 4 or 5 paces, I'd stop completely and just breathe shallow, letting my ears do the work. It wasn't silence now. Not completely. Every once in a while, I'd hear something move far off. A branch cracking under too much weight, a distant thud like something heavy dropping from a height. Once, I heard a long, low moan that might have been wind and might have been something bigger. Twice, I heard laughter. Not the ceiling mouth chorus, not the obvious glitch. This was softer, almost playful, childlike. The first time, I froze. It came from my left, about 30 yards away, behind a stand of pines. High, breathy giggles like kids on a playground. Silence. A woman's voice whispered. "They'll hear you." I knew that voice. I'd heard it 3 years ago on a phone speaker after a mission when my sister handed her toddler the phone and told her to say goodnight to Uncle Danny. "You're dead," I told myself under my breath, barely moving my lips. "They're in another state. Not here, not here, not here." The giggling went on for another few seconds. It stopped like somebody had cut a tape. I didn't go investigate. Ruleful kept me alive more than once out there. Twice I started to skirt a fallen log and felt the air thicken on the far side. That invisible heat haze prickling the back of my neck. I backed off, found another way. Once, I reached out to steady myself on a tree and felt the bark under my palm give, just slightly, like pushing a thumb into someone's arm. I snatched my hand back. As I went, the forest changed. At first it was subtle. Fewer leaves on the ground, like something had eaten them. Little piles of bones under trees where you'd expect to see squirrel shells or owl leftovers, but arranged neatly. A ring of vertebrae here, a fan of ribs there. Later it got less subtle. Broken branches 14 feet up, like something huge and heavy had moved through the canopy. Scratches on trunks that didn't match any claw mark I recognized. Too many lines, too regular, like someone had dragged a hand with extra fingers down the wood. In one clearing, I found a deer, or what was left of it. It lay on its side, chest opened. No blood, just empty space inside, ribs clean. Its eyes were missing, sockets filled instead with a fine, filmy membrane. Under the skin along its flank, something pulsed in steady waves like a heartbeat. Its legs twitched occasionally, not full kicks, more like the movement that runs through a dog's paws when it dreams. I gave a wide berth. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned. I crested a small rise and saw a break ahead, a strip of gray through the trunks. Straight line. No way nature made that. Road. It was maybe 200 meters off. Between me and it was a shallow dip, a little valley full of thicker brush. The kind that hid things. I dropped to my stomach and crawled the last part to the edge of the tree line, peering down. The road itself was cracked asphalt, 2 narrow lanes, faded yellow line down middle. A rusted guardrail ran along one side where the land fell away into a ditch. On the shoulder sat a truck. Green, official looking. Crestwood Park Services stenciled on the side. One door was open, the other was shut. The windshield was smashed. I couldn't see inside from this angle. There were no other vehicles, no people, no sound. You know that feeling you get when you see civilization again after being out in the wild for a bit? That little loosening of something you didn't know you tensed? I felt that for half a second. Then I saw the footprints. The mud at the edge of the asphalt was torn up. Prints overlapped, some human, some not. Boots, bare feet, something with hooves, something with too many toes. All of them in a chaotic cluster. They led from the tree lean to the truck. Around it, away, someone toward the ditch. The ditch was full of shadows. I waited, watched, counted my heartbeats again. Nothing moved. I slid back from the edge, circled along the rise to a spot where I could get a slightly higher view and risked raising my head. The open truck door faced me now. No bodies inside, no blood on the seat. The keys dangled from the ignition, swaying slightly in the faint breeze. There were scratches on the dash, deep grooves like something with bone claws had tried to climb up it. The radio mic was off the hook, dangling by its cord, swinging. Every time it bumped the console, it made a faint, hollow thok that carried too far in the silence. Martinez. My name floated up from the ditch. Not loud, conversational, like someone leaning on a car hood, calling to a friend. Every muscle in my body locked. Slowly, as slow as I've ever moved in my life, I eased backwards until my head was level with the ground again. Leaves rustled below. Something big shifted. Hey, the voice added. It's safe. It didn't sound like Coleman this time. It sounded like me. Not the debrief voice. My regular voice, dragged out of my own throat and played back at me. I lay there, face in the dirt, heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it would break free. I could feel my own breath bouncing off the soil. The urge to look was almost unbearable. We're monkeys. Curiosity is baked in. Something calls your name. You look. You can't help it. Rule 2 is a knife you hold to your own throat and decide not to flinch. Feet, lots of them, made soft, squelching sounds in the mud. I heard hands slap metal. The truck creaked. You're doing good, my stolen voice said. Made it this far. That takes guts. But you know how this ends if you don't get in the truck, right? You're tired. You're slow. We're not. There was the we, not I. Something thumped against the underside of the truck bed. The metal pinged. If you come with us, another voice said, slipping over the first one, we can fix that. That one sounded like Torres. I felt physically ill for a second. We can make you strong. Matthew's cadence. Fast. Perfect, Coleman's tone added. The syllables didn't overlap right. They tripped over each other, half a beat out of sync. The lullaby again, but with words. I'm good, I thought, pressing my teeth together. Hard pass. The truck creaked again. I know you're there, my fake voice said. I can hear your heart. I believed it. It didn't matter. I stayed down. Eventually, after a time that could have been 10 minutes or could have been an hour, the sounds faded. Footsteps squelched away across the road, then into the trees on the other side. Branches rustled, then settled. I waited until my legs went from numb to pins and needles to a low, dull ache before I moved. When I finally risked a glance, the road was empty. The truck door was still open. The keys were still swaying, but there were new scratches on the door on the hood, finger-length deep. I didn't go down to get the truck. Even if it started, where was I going to drive? Through a forest that wasn't just a forest anymore, with things that could climb into the engine block and ride along? Down to the nearest town? Maybe with a car full of hitchhikers I didn't invite? No, I backed away from the road. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run out onto the asphalt and wave my arms and hope that a ranger, a cop, a soccer mom in a minivan came by before nightfall. Instead, I went back into the trees and sat with my back to a thick trunk where nothing could sneak up behind me without at least making the bark shiver. My phone buzzed again. 3%. Time. I opened the Notes app. The same one I've been typing this into before, down under 50 feet of concrete and human hubris. The keyboard blurred for a second as my eyes filled. I blinked hard, inhaled until my chest hurt, and let it out slow. No one is coming to save me. That was clear. But that ranger on the radio, the hikers he mentioned, the kids who'd grow up and decide to go camping in Crestwood because it was pretty and untouched and remote. They didn't have to die blind. I started typing. I told you about Helix Ion already, about the gate, the bodies, the thing that laughed while it tore fields apart, the ceiling full of singing mouths, Torres becoming an incubator, Matthews dying in my arms while tongues tried to strangle him, Coleman giving his life to buy me a tunnel. What I didn't tell you is that the rules they drilled into us weren't about protecting us. They were about protecting you from us if we failed. Rule 1 keeps you from becoming a relay for whatever gets into the comms. Rule 2 keeps you from answering when your dead sister knocks on your bedroom window at 3 in the morning and uses your full name. Rule 3 stops you walking up to the corpse in the road to check a pulse and catching a tendril to the face. Rule 4 tells you to leave the room when the air starts feeling wrong, even if the thermostat says everything's fine. Rule 5 tells you that any exit they give you is drawn on a map by someone who assumed whoever followed it wouldn't be fully human by the time they got there. They called it regeneration, recovery, healing. What they built were predators that don't stay dead, that can recycle any meat into fresh weapons, that remember everything they were before you cut them open. We were supposed to be the failsafe. We weren't. Now they're out. In the last 3 hours, here's what I've seen in this forest. A bird that should have died walking around with something else inside, it's singing nursery rhymes. A deer with no organs left moving like it was dreaming something terrible. Invisible pockets of heat and cold where the environment glitched. Like the world's texture hadn't fully loaded. Voices coming from mouths that couldn't physically be there. On the radio, in the trees, in the ditch next to a road that used to be a safe way out. Something that used my voice my words, my memories, to try to talk me into climbing into a truck it had already turned into a feeding trough. I've seen hints of them changing shape, too. That thing in the control room, the patchwork soldier, that was Haliction's idea of finished product. Efficient, brutal, recognizable as a weapon. Out here, there's no reason for them to look like us. If you're expecting monsters with claws and fangs and glowing eyes, you're not going to see the one wearing your neighbor's face jogging past your house at dawn. You're not going to question the dog that wanders into your yard with stitches you think are from surgery but aren't. You're not going to be prepared when your phone rings and your dead father's number pops up with his voice on the other end, saying your name just right. They learn. That's what they were built to do. Adapt, mimic, integrate. Nature does that slowly. Helix Scion put it on fast forward. I don't know how far they'll spread or how fast. I don't know if the explosion disrupted whatever central control there was, or if I just freed each iteration to start thinking for itself. I know the forest around me feels fuller, heavier, like every tree root is carrying signals that used to be neurons. My phone's at 2% now. Battery icon in the red. The LTE bar is still there, that one stubborn dot. It's enough. It has to be. I tried calling emergency services earlier. Line wouldn't connect. I tried sending a text. It sat in the outbox like a resigned shrug. But the first time I posted, the net took it. Somewhere, somehow, a packet made it through the noise. So I'm pushing this one out next. I don't know if I'll be able to send another. If you're reading this, don't come here. I know how it sounds. Some anonymous guy on the internet writing a long horror story claiming it's real. I think it was bullshit too. So don't believe me because I'm asking nicely. Believe me because the next time your dog starts growling at a corner of the room where there's nothing, you're going to think about this. Because the next time air in your living room feels too warm for no reason and your thermostat says it's fine, you're going to remember Rule 4 and maybe step outside. Because when someone calls you for a number you don't recognize and uses your full name in a voice that sounds almost right, but not quite, I want you to hang up. Here are the only things I can tell you that might help. Don't respond to voices that come from where they shouldn't, no matter who they sound like. If they need you badly enough, they'll show themselves. If they don't, they didn't need you for anything good. If an animal's moving wrong, but not bleeding, don't touch it. Don't go near it. Don't try to put it out of its misery. You're not doing it a favor. It's bait. If the room feels hotter or colder in a way that doesn't match what your instruments say, leave. Immediately. Don't worry about looking stupid. Don't worry about how it'll look to other people. Embarrassment won't kill you. Whatever's adjusting your reality to suit itself might. If you find any mention of Helix Ion Labs, Level Black Protocols, Subject 47B, anything with those labels, don't try to investigate. Don't go digging through PDFs and old incident reports. Don't go ghost hunting in the woods they used as a buffer. The people who were supposed to keep a lid on this already failed. If someone asks you to help cover up an industrial accident near Crestwood, tell them to go to hell and then go as far away from here as you can. I don't know how much time I have left. The light's going. The temperature's starting to creep up again, even though the night air should be getting colder. I can hear them out in the trees. Sometimes it's just movement, that rustle of weight where there shouldn't be any. Sometimes it's practicing. That's what it sounds like. Little snippets of conversation, half-familiar phrases, like someone going through a stack of stolen tapes and trying out different intonations. I heard my mother's voice 10 minutes ago. She sang the song she used to when I was sick as a kid. She missed a word. I heard Matthews shouting at me to cover the door. I heard Torres laughing at a joke I made 2 years ago in a bar. I heard Coleman say my name the way he did when I signed up for Level Black. That mix of respect and warning. None of those people are here. I am, and they're getting closer. The screen just dimmed itself again. 1%. If anyone is reading this, don't send help. Don't come looking. Don't tag your buddy saying road trip and think it's funny. Don't go checking it out because you don't believe me. Just spread this around. Put it everywhere. Let it leak into forums and group chats and comment sections until it's just another creepy story people half remember. Because when the first reports start coming in from towns around Crestwood, missing hikers, weird animals, unexplained heat waves, hallucinations of dead relatives, you'll already know what it is. You'll know to lock your doors. You'll know not to open them when something outside knocks and says your full name in a voice that's almost right. And when the lights flicker and your thermostat stubbornly tells you everything's fine while sweat beads on your upper lip, you'll remember some scared asshole in the woods telling you that the numbers lie. They're above ground now. They're learning. And this time with a control group.